Jasmine always thought she had control over her life, especially when it came to her academics. A dedicated student at Westbridge College, she had her priorities set. Graduate with honours and get a good job. But everything started to shift when she entered Professor Warren's class. He was different from the other professors. Engaging, charismatic, and attentive. Jasmine felt a strange connection with him, one that she couldn't quite explain. It was dangerous, and she knew it. Yet she found herself drawn to him more with each passing lecture. Professor Warren wasn't just captivating in the classroom. Outside of class, he seemed to take a special interest in her work, often asking her to stay back for one-on-one discussions. These meetings started innocently enough, focused on her research paper and academic progress. But over time, the line between professor and student began to blur. He complimented her intelligence, made her feel seen in ways no one else did. And before she knew it, what began as innocent admiration turned into something far more complicated. The first time Jasmine realized that things had gone too far was during one of their after-class meetings. They were sitting in his office, reviewing a paper she had written. The discussion started off as usual, but then Professor Warren's hand brushed against hers. A simple gesture, yet it sent shivers down her spine. She glanced up at him, and there was a moment, a fleeting second, where their eyes locked and the atmosphere changed. He didn't pull away, and neither did she. It was as though they had both silently agreed to cross a boundary that neither of them should. The next thing Jasmine knew, they were kissing. It was fast, intense, and filled with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel. In that moment, she forgot about the consequences, the ethics, and the fact that this was her professor. All she could think about was how she had never felt more alive. But as soon as it happened, a wave of guilt washed over her. She pulled away, breathless, wondering how they had reached this point. After that kiss, things between Jasmine and Professor Warren became increasingly complicated. They didn't speak of it the next day, but the tension between them grew thicker with each passing class. It was as if their secret affair had created a world only they could inhabit. But Jasmine couldn't shake the guilt. She knew it was wrong, yet she was too far gone to stop now. Their encounters became more frequent, more intense, and harder to hide. Jasmine began to live a double life. On the outside, she was still the top student, attending classes and hanging out with friends. But inside, she was falling deeper into an affair that threatened to destroy everything she had worked for. She lied to her friends, her family, even herself, convincing everyone, and herself, that she was fine. But the truth was, she was spiraling out of control. Each day brought new challenges, new fears of getting caught. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. One night, after a particularly emotional meeting with Professor Warren, Jasmine found herself in his apartment. She knew she shouldn't have gone, but the pull between them was undeniable. That night, they crossed another line, one they could never take back. Jasmine woke up the next morning with a sinking feeling in her stomach. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but the damage was already done. In the days that followed, Jasmine became more and more withdrawn. She could no longer focus on her studies. Her grades started to slip, and her friends noticed the change in her behavior. She couldn't tell anyone what had happened, not even her closest friends. She was trapped in a situation that felt impossible to escape from. Every time she thought about ending things with Professor Warren, something pulled her back. It was a toxic cycle, one she didn't know how to break. Weeks passed, and Jasmine noticed something unusual. She was late. Her period hadn't come. At first she brushed it off, thinking it was stress or the toll the affair was taking on her. But as the days went on, the reality began to sink in. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Her heart pounded as she bought a pregnancy test, her hands trembling as she waited for the result. When the 2 lines appeared on the test, confirming her worst fear, her world came crashing down. She was pregnant. The realization left her frozen in shock. How could this have happened? What was she going to do? The weight of her decision felt suffocating. Professor Warren was the father, but telling him seemed impossible. She was terrified of how he would react, and even more frightened of the scandal it would cause. For the first time in her life, Jasmine felt completely lost, with no idea how to move forward. Jasmine spent days avoiding Professor Warren, unsure of how to break the news to him. Every time she saw him in class, her stomach churned with anxiety. But she knew she couldn't avoid the truth forever. One evening, she gathered her courage and went to his office. He greeted her with a warm smile, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. Jasmine sat down, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Professor Warren's expression changed, his smile fading as he leaned forward, sensing the seriousness of her tone. "I'm pregnant." The room fell into silence. Professor Warren stared at her, disbelief written across his face. He stood up, pacing the small space of his office, running his hand through his hair. Jasmine could see the panic setting in, just as it had in her. "This can't be happening," he muttered. But it was happening, and there was no turning back. Professor Warren's shock quickly turned into panic, and Jasmine could see it in his eyes. He was pacing the room, mumbling to himself, trying to process the news. "This could ruin both of us," he said, finally stopping to face her. Jasmine's heart pounded, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. She didn't need to be reminded. She already knew the consequences of their actions. Warren suggested a solution, one that made Jasmine's stomach turn. "Maybe we should keep this quiet. You could, take care of it." His words were careful, but the meaning was clear. Jasmine felt a wave of nausea. He wanted her to terminate the pregnancy. A cold chill ran down her spine as she realized he wasn't thinking about her or the baby, but only about saving himself. Jasmine stared at him, speechless. Could she really go through with something like that? She had never imagined herself in this situation, but now that she was, the decision felt impossibly complex. She left his office without saying another word, her mind swirling with confusion and fear. Jasmine walked around campus, her thoughts a tangled mess. She couldn't believe Professor Warren had suggested such a thing. Deep down, she had hoped for some kind of support from him, not this cold, calculated response. She felt utterly alone. As the hours passed, she replayed the conversation in her head over and over again, wondering what she should do. The pregnancy was still early, and Warren's proposition echoed in her mind. She could end this before anyone else found out, avoid the scandal and try to move on with her life. But every time she considered it, a sense of dread washed over her. Could she really live with that decision? And what about the baby? What kind of life would it have if she decided to keep it? Jasmine felt trapped between 2 impossible choices, each one carrying a heavy price. Jasmine couldn't carry this burden alone anymore. She needed to tell someone, anyone, before the weight of it all consumed her. After days of internal turmoil, she decided to confide in her best friend, Lila. Lila had always been there for her, through thick and thin, and Jasmine trusted her with her darkest secrets. One afternoon, they met at a quiet cafe off campus, where Jasmine finally opened up about everything. Her affair with Professor Warren, the pregnancy, and his suggestion to take care of it. Lila was shocked, her eyes wide as she listened. "Jasmine, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Jasmine could only shrug, feeling the tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Lila reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to go through this alone," she said gently. "But whatever you decide, make sure it's your choice, not his." Lila's words gave Jasmine a sense of clarity, but also deepened the weight of the decision ahead. She realized that whatever she chose would define the rest of her life. In the days that followed, Jasmine noticed a shift in Professor Warren. He became distant, avoiding eye contact during class and cutting their private meetings short. It was as if he was trying to create as much space between them as possible, a stark contrast to the man who had once pursued her so eagerly. Jasmine felt a growing sense of abandonment. The man she had once felt so connected to was slipping away, leaving her to face this crisis alone. She wondered if Warren regretted everything. Was he ashamed of her now? Or was he simply terrified of the consequences? Either way, his withdrawal made it clear that Jasmine was on her own. She stopped attending his office hours, focusing instead on trying to make sense of her own feelings. Warren was no longer the center of her thoughts. The reality of her pregnancy had taken over, demanding her full attention. With Lila's support, Jasmine finally gathered the courage to schedule a doctor's appointment. She needed to confirm the pregnancy and understand her options. The waiting room felt like a void, the seconds ticking by in agonizing slowness. Jasmine's heart raced as she sat there surrounded by other women who seemed so calm, while she felt like her world was falling apart. When her name was called, Jasmine followed the nurse into the examination room, her hands trembling. The doctor was kind, asking her questions and guiding her through the necessary tests. When the confirmation came, Jasmine felt both relief and dread. She was really pregnant. There was no more doubt. The doctor discussed her options, but Jasmine felt overwhelmed. Each choice seemed more daunting than the last. She left the clinic with pamphlets and information, but the weight of the decision loomed larger than ever. The next time Jasmine saw Professor Warren, she could feel the tension between them, even before he spoke. He pulled her aside after class, his expression serious. "Jasmine, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. They found a quiet corner, away from prying eyes. Warren's face was pale, his usual, confident demeanor gone. "I've been thinking about everything," he began, glancing around nervously. "We need to be careful. I can help you, financially, if that's what you need. You can take care of this, and we'll move on with our lives." His offer felt cold, transactional, and it shattered any lingering affection Jasmine might have had for him. She stared at him, unable to believe that this was the man she had once admired. He wasn't offering support. He was offering a way to erase the problem. But Jasmine knew now that this wasn't just a problem to be solved. It was her life, her body, and her choice. Warren's solution was no longer an option for her. Jasmine left her encounter with Professor Warren feeling more alone than ever. His indifference had only solidified her decision. This was no longer just about her. and it certainly wasn't about him anymore. The baby growing inside her was real, and no amount of money or persuasion could erase that. The realization hit her like a wave. This was her responsibility, and she had to make the choice for herself, not for Warren or anyone else. That night, Jasmine lay awake, her thoughts racing. What would her life look like if she kept the baby? Could she balance school and motherhood? Would her parents ever forgive her? And what about Warren? Would he just disappear, leaving her to face the future alone? But no matter how hard she tried to imagine her life without the child, the thought of ending the pregnancy felt impossible. She knew deep down that she couldn't do it. Telling her parents felt like the hardest thing Jasmine had ever had to do. She dreaded the conversation, fearing their disappointment, their anger, and their judgment, but she knew it had to be done. They deserved to know, and more importantly, she needed their support now more than ever. One weekend she went home, her stomach in knots as she sat across the dinner table from them, nervously picking at her food. "Mum, Dad, I have something to tell you," she started, her voice trembling. Her parents looked up from their plates, sensing the seriousness in her tone. Jasmine took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Her mother's face turned pale, her father's fork clattering to the table. Jasmine watched as her parents processed the news, their expressions shifting from shock to confusion to sadness. Her mother was the first to speak, her voice soft but strained. "How could this happen, Jasmine? We raised you better than this." Her father, usually calm, was visibly upset. His hands clenched into fists on the table. Her parents' disappointment weighed heavily on Jasmine's heart. For hours, they sat in the living room, discussing what had happened and what the future would look like. Her mother tried to hold back tears, while her father sat quietly, clearly grappling with his emotions. They asked the obvious questions. "Who's the father? What are you going to do now?" Jasmine hesitated, but eventually revealed that the father was her college professor. Her father's reaction was immediate. Anger flashed across his face. "A professor? Jasmine, do you know how serious this is? This could ruin his career. And yours." His words stung, but Jasmine understood his concern. Her mother, on the other hand, remained silent, processing the gravity of the situation. After hours of tension, they finally calmed down, though the air was still heavy with unspoken fears. Her parents weren't happy, but they didn't abandon her either. They promised to support her, no matter what decision she made. Jasmine left their house, feeling both relieved and burdened. She had told them the truth, but the road ahead still felt uncertain. As the weeks passed, it became harder for Jasmine to keep the pregnancy a secret. Though she hadn't told anyone besides Lila, rumors began to circulate on campus. It started with whispers in the hallways, sideways glances from classmates, and questions that seemed innocent but carried a weight of curiosity. "Is everything okay? You've been looking a little different lately," a classmate asked her one afternoon. Jasmine could feel the walls closing in around her. She knew that once people found out, her life would change forever. Her reputation, her relationships, her future. It all seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Every time she walked across campus, she felt as though eyes were on her, judging her. The stress of it all was overwhelming, but she knew she couldn't let it consume her. Through it all, Lila remained her rock. She reassured Jasmine that people's opinions didn't define her, but the pressure was still there. Jasmine knew she needed to stay strong, Not just for herself, but for the baby growing inside her. The growing distance between Jasmine and Professor Warren was undeniable. What had once been an intense, secretive affair now felt like a hollow memory. Warren rarely spoke to her anymore, avoiding her in class and refusing to meet up privately. When they did exchange words, his tone was cold and distant, as if he wanted to forget that any of this had ever happened. One afternoon, Jasmine cornered him after class. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm despite the tremble in her hands. Warren looked at her, his expression blank. "About what?" he asked, his tone detached. Jasmine felt her frustration rise. "About the baby, Warren. About us." Warren sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. "Jasmine, I've already told you. I can't be involved in this. This isn't what I signed up for." His words cut deep, and Jasmine realized that whatever connection they once had was gone. Warren wasn't going to step up, and Jasmine would have to face this on her own. With Warren out of the picture, Jasmine leaned on Lila more than ever. Lila had been her confidant from the start, and now she was her only support system on campus. They spent hours together, talking through Jasmine's fears and anxieties, imagining what life would be like after the baby was born. Lila didn't have all the answers, but just having someone by her side made Jasmine feel a little less lost. "Have you thought about what you're going to do?" Lila asked one evening, as they sat in Jasmine's dorm room, surrounded by textbooks they hadn't even opened. Jasmine nodded, though her mind was still clouded with doubt. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "But I also don't know if I can walk away from it either." Lila placed a reassuring hand on her friend's shoulder. "Whatever you decide, I'll be here. You don't have to do this alone." Those words gave Jasmine the strength she needed. She still had a long road ahead, but at least she knew she had someone walking beside her. As the weight of her situation grew, Jasmine realized she needed more than just Lila's support. She decided to visit the campus counseling center. She had never seen a therapist before, but now she felt like she needed professional guidance. The counselor, Dr. Samuels, was kind and non-judgmental. Jasmine found it easy to talk to her, to open up about her fears and the overwhelming decisions she was facing. Dr. Samuels listened carefully, offering Jasmine a safe space to express her emotions without fear of judgment. "It sounds like you've been carrying a lot on your shoulders," she said gently. Jasmine nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I feel like I don't know what to do," Jasmine admitted. "Everything is changing, and I don't know how to handle it." Dr. Samuels offered her guidance, helping Jasmine sort through her feelings and develop a plan for the future. Jasmine left the session feeling a little lighter, like she had taken a small but important step forward in navigating the chaos of her life. After her session with Dr. Samuels, Jasmine started to see things a little more clearly. She knew that no matter what happened next, she had to take control of her future. The uncertainty still loomed over her, but she was determined to find a way forward. She spent more time researching her options, reading about what it meant to be a young mother, and considering how her life would change if she kept the baby. Jasmine also began to confront the realities of balancing her studies with pregnancy. Her grades had started to slip, and she struggled to focus in class. The pressure was mounting, but she knew she couldn't give up. There was too much at stake. The future felt daunting, but Jasmine began to set small goals for herself, hoping that by taking things one step at a time, she could manage both her academic and personal life. As Jasmine's pregnancy progressed, Lila's support became even more critical. She was always there with a kind word, a listening ear, or just a distraction when Jasmine needed it most. Lila would surprise Jasmine with snacks, offer to help with her schoolwork, and even accompany her to doctor's appointments. It was during one of these visits that Jasmine realized just how much she valued Lila's friendship. "Thank you for everything," Jasmine said one afternoon after a particularly exhausting day. Lila smiled warmly, brushing off the gratitude. "You'd do the same for me," she replied. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, and Jasmine found solace in knowing she wasn't alone in facing this new chapter of her life. The baby was still months away, but the preparations had already begun. Lila helped Jasmine start looking at baby supplies, flipping through magazines and browsing online. It was a bittersweet experience, knowing that everything was changing, but also feeling the excitement of new life ahead. In the midst of her challenges, Jasmine met another student on campus, Sarah, who was also pregnant. Their chance meeting at the campus health clinic sparked a friendship that quickly became a lifeline for Jasmine. Sarah, a couple of months ahead in her pregnancy, had already been through many of the struggles Jasmine was just beginning to face. They bonded over shared experiences, from the awkward stares in class to the fatigue that seemed to last all day. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning," Sarah admitted one day as they sat together in the student lounge. "But then I remember why I'm doing this, and it gives me strength." Jasmine found comfort in Sarah's words. Having someone who truly understood what she was going through made a world of difference. Their conversations gave Jasmine the courage to keep pushing forward, even on the hardest days. Sarah also introduced Jasmine to a support group for young mothers, offering her a community of people who could provide advice and encouragement. Attending her first support group meeting was nerve-wracking for Jasmine. She wasn't sure what to expect, or if she would even fit in. But as she walked into the small room, filled with other young women, she immediately felt a sense of belonging. The facilitator, a woman named Rachel, welcomed her with a warm smile, and Jasmine quickly realized that everyone in the group was going through their own version of her story. Each week, the group gathered to share their experiences, offer advice, and listen to one another. Jasmine found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She talked about her fears, her relationship with Warren, and the uncertainty of her future. And in return, she received nothing but support and understanding. The group became a place of refuge for Jasmine. It was a space where she didn't have to pretend that everything was okay. She could be honest about her struggles and find comfort in the fact that she wasn't alone. As the semester wore on, Warren became almost a ghost in Jasmine's life. His avoidance of her had turned into full-blown estrangement. He stopped making eye contact altogether, no longer offering even the faintest acknowledgement of her presence. It was clear to Jasmine that he had washed his hands of the situation, leaving her to navigate the consequences of their actions on her own. One afternoon, after class, Jasmine tried one last time to speak to him. She cornered him in the hallway, determined to get some kind of closure. "Are you really going to just disappear?" she asked, her voice steady but full of frustration. Warren looked at her, his eyes tired and resigned. "Jasmine, I can't be a part of this," he said flatly. "You have your life, and I have mine. We both made mistakes, and now we have to move on." His words stung, but Jasmine wasn't surprised. She had already prepared herself for the reality that Warren would never take responsibility. With that final exchange, Jasmine felt a strange sense of relief. She no longer needed to rely on him or hold on to any hope that he would step up. It was just her and the baby now. After Warren's departure from her life, Jasmine felt a mix of emotions. Though she had come to terms with his absence, the reality of facing motherhood alone weighed heavily on her. But as time passed, she found an unexpected source of strength within herself. For the first time since learning she was pregnant, Jasmine started to feel a sense of empowerment. She was no longer waiting for someone else to make things better. She was taking control of her life. With the help of her support group, her friendship with Lila, and the connection she had made with Sarah, Jasmine began to plan for the future. She started looking into childcare options, budgeting her finances, and even preparing for the day when she would have to balance school with raising a baby. It wasn't easy, but each small step forward felt like a victory. Her confidence grew, and for the first time, Jasmine allowed herself to feel excited about the baby. It was no longer just a source of anxiety. It was a new beginning, a chapter of her life that, despite its challenges, held the potential for happiness. As Jasmine stood in her dorm room, clutching the sonogram picture, a sudden knock echoed through the silence. Her heart raced. No one was supposed to visit tonight. She opened the door to find a plain envelope on the floor, her name scrawled across it in unfamiliar handwriting. With trembling hands, she tore it open and froze as she read the chilling words. "I know your secret, and if you don't comply, everyone else will too." Her pulse quickened. Someone knew. But who? And what did they want? Subscribe for part 2 and share this story with your friends.